All right, you know the idea. Your 5 images includes an image or object from your childhood, an image or object from your adolescence, an image or object from great failure, an image or object from great success, and an image or object from what you believe is the future.
I just got this picture. I don't have a lot of pictures from my childhood. I was raised Rastafarian.
Really?
Yeah, but
what part of Jamaica?
We lived in the Bubba Shanti community in Bull Bay and the Hill, Bubba Hill. I was there in the 70s, so it was early childhood. And we left there, I got sick, and I was hospitalized in Jamaica. And so I was sent to my family here before my mom came. And then my mom came. So I came up here when I was 5. And so in this picture, I am 7, and we are in the botanical gardens in the Bronx. My uncle Kamau had come for a visit from Jamaica, and he took that picture. And I know I'm 7 because my mom is pregnant with my youngest sister, who I'm 8 years older than. And the bottle belongs to my second youngest sister.
So there are 3 of you?
There's 4 of us.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 girls. I'm the oldest of 4 girls. Yeah.
Explain to the uninitiated
what Rasta is.
What Rastafarianism is.
Well, first of all, Rastas don't deal with any isms and schisms. If you're at all invested in the linguistics that come with Rasta.
But correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm also Jamaican. You didn't know that.
Right. I didn't know that, yeah.
A lot of it probably came a little bit from Marcus Garvey, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I can try to give you the quickest breakdown
Yes,
of Rasta
please.
as possible. All right. So Rasta is an Abrahamic religion. And it definitely comes out of Judaism and Christianity. But its link really is the Ethiopian Coptic Church, which would be the first form of Christianity. And so Marcus Garvey said, look to the east for a black king when he was talking about his Pan-African movement. Very specifically, thing that linked to Marcus Garvey was Ethiopianism, which is an African-centered Christianity that sprung out of Menelik beating the Italians. So Ethiopia is the only non-colonized African country, and that movement sparked a religious movement all throughout Africa, not just Ethiopia. There were Ethiopian churches that popped up in the south of America, but also all over the Caribbean. The activation was 1930 when Haile Selassie was coronated. But a lot of the people who were part of Marcus Garvey's Pan-African movement saw a connection. Some of the original priests and ministers acknowledged the connection of their own, looking at Haile Selassie as a potential messiah. All 3 of the branches of Rasta have a Pan-African intent in terms of the idea to return back to the continent.
If you can then, if you could go to your adolescence.
Okay. I picked this was a self-portrait that I did when I was 17 in clay. So it was one of my first clay pieces, and I made an Aztec style vessel. And in the original version, I used to wear my dreadlocks tied up and they would sprout out of the top of my head wrap. So it had a lot of locks attached to it, and they broke off, and I would keep them inside of this container. And I think I referenced that because it was also towards the end of the time. I cut my locks when I was 19, almost 20. And it was
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Growing up Rasta in the 80s was not cute.
It wasn't cute in Jamaica in the 70s either.
It wasn't cute. It wasn't cute in Jamaica, yes.
Right.
But in Jamaica, if you were a Rasta, you were usually contained within a community of other Rastas.
Yes.
In the Bronx in 1980 for 1990,
Right.
it was not good in terms of socially for adolescent purposes. It was barely okay to be Jamaican in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So, if you're just regular Jamaican, you were a coconut. If you're a Rasta, you were one of Bob Marley's children. Just literally, that's what people said. And people who didn't know just called you Medusa if they saw your hair. But so that was like elementary and junior high school was like torture. But my personality is such because people assumed that I would cut them off because I couldn't deal with it, or cut it off. That was the advice. You'd be really pretty if you cut your hair. Mm-hmm. And so I cut my locks to spite everyone. And then when it became fashionable towards the mid 90s, I had already dissociated myself from the Rastafarian movement, and I had gone through this like reassessment of what my personal understanding of faith was. So I'd move away from the ideas of organized religion, both because they didn't agree with my feminist aesthetics, and then also I found that in all organized religion, the people who control that community often are just the loudest but not the most righteous.
Yeah.
So I kind of like decided that I didn't want people to make obvious connections with me in a particular mindset.
I understand that. So this is kind of the beginning phase of your adulthood, basically.
Yes.
How do you make the transition from doing this, doing a piece of art recreationally, to wanting to make it into a career or make it into your life's goal?
It was my life's goal since I was 10. It's like the moment that I decided that I wanted to be an artist. Mm-hmm. But as a Jamaican, with Jamaican parents,
yes,
it wasn't practical.
Right.
But that was my goal. Whatever else I was going to do, I figured first I thought I'd be a vet first so I could retire early and have my art practice. I worked at a veterinarian shop,
right,
and realized that it also included feces and blood.
Yes.
So I didn't want to do that.
Yes.
I worked I thought maybe I'll do law like my aunt.
Oh boy.
I worked in the criminal courthouse over a summer. I saw too many people I knew, and they gave me way more responsibilities than I should have had at 15 because I was eager.
Oh my God.
And I didn't want to do that. Uh-huh. By the time I did this piece, I was working in fashion. I had been making T-shirts, and I had worked with like Mashoud and local designers. Mm-hmm. And I met a friend and business partner, and we started a fashion company. And so I thought that's what I would do, because that way I could make good money, because it was a commercial art, mm-hmm. and that eventually would lead me to still make my fine arts. When I started Pratt, I started as a fashion major, and I had an epiphany. We'll call it that for now.
Please bring positivity into my life.
I was 19, 20 tops. So I'm modeling in these scenes, but some of my clothes are featured in there from my fashion companies. But it was also the height of my depression. I was that thin because I was not eating, and I was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day.
Why is this a great failure?
Because I wasn't making my choices in my life that made me happy. It was like I was doing something that I stumbled upon, and it wasn't fulfilling.
What was the turning point that made you switch from fashion to fine arts?
Success is something that can be perceived. So while we were getting magazines or getting our clothes in shows, we weren't really making ends meet in this way that was feasible. And my partner was far more ambitious for fashion than I was. The more I worked in the fashion industry, the less valuable it seemed a thing to do.
It wasn't like an epiphany one day. It's just sort of a series of just
it wasn't
feeling terrible about yourself.
Feeling terrible about myself, feeling terrible about my life, feeling terrible about what it was I did, feeling terrible about my friendships, feeling my self-esteem was not intact, and feeling like a fraud because there's a certain perception that went with it. So there's a certain perception about what you look like and what you're doing. And, so I was really young. I was styling, working on videos, had my stuff in magazines from my senior year of high school. And that all seemed really amazing to folks. But it wasn't, you know?
So how did you now explain to your Jamaican relatives that you were going to make a transition
Well, I didn't have to because we were estranged during that time.
from your parents? Oh boy.
Yeah, everything was happening.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I mean, I decided to move out. See, I had gone from super good Jamaican Rastafarian to working in fashion, doing the industry parties, going to clubs. I moved out the beginning of senior year of high school. It's also when I got like my first boyfriend. Like everything happened really quickly. And my father was like, no. And I was like,
You said no too.
I said no too, yeah.
When you went through this transition and you got into painting, what was the end goal you thought in painting, or you just wanted to fall into something that you felt called to?
Well, I'd always painted since high school, since before the sculpture, but the paintings that I started to really be interested in the idea of power. So the gaze, the figures in the canvas looking back at the viewer, and then also the trap of the canvas being this two-dimensional space that the figures are trapped in, and kind of negotiating these boxes, and it became this metaphor for the state of Africans in America or in Western culture, where we are the culture. Our music, our pain has informed everything that is specific to American culture other than that which is native or comes from England or somewhere else. But so we're this form of entertainment, but our power is limited because we're in these boxes. And these boxes are race, sex, class, that kind of inform the entertainment that is Black culture. So my first step was to deal with the idea of it looking back. And that's when I began to transition into the three-dimensional component. I consider the two-dimensional space the trap, or the two-dimensional space of stereotype, And so the consciousness breaking through that space became the clay.
You did your master's in ceramics?
I did my first master's in art education with
two masters.
with a focus in ceramics.
Okay.
And then 10 years later, I did my master's in ceramics.
Why did you feel you needed to do it?
So when I left fashion, I wanted to do something that was meaningful. And I don't think there's anything more meaningful in terms of a career than teaching. I'm skilled at it. It's like a natural skill to convey information to kids or young adults.
Okay.
And so that's what I did my first master's, my focus, and I went to teach and also fulfilled my parents' desire for me to get a real job. But as an art teacher, so it was a fair compromise.
Okay.
So I feel like ultimately, no matter what you do in career or life, this support system and this future and this family is my greatest success.
Why?
Okay, so I feel like a successful, happy, healthy family is largely by chance, And I feel like success is something, well, one, you can interpret, but two, you can control. And the degree to which you consider yourself successful is subjective, right? But you can make a plan for that success, right? I can't make a plan to guarantee that I will have my retrospective at the Guggenheim in, 10 to 15 years. But that would be a benchmark for success in art, you know what I'm saying? But I can feel successful as an artist now, even though by many standards I am not self-sufficient in terms of living off of my art practice, but I feel I'm making my art and I'm supporting it and it's supporting me, right? So, and I kind of can gauge a series of things that you would do to get to the point where you feel good about that portion of your success. Whereas family is just, you can make a plan, but there's no guarantee. You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you mean.
There's like more work and more at stake to some extent. I mean, it's a cliche almost, right?
Yeah.
To the extent that you can have everything and have absolutely nothing, And so if I have nothing else, but I have them, I still have, success.
I'm gonna move on now to your last image,
Okay.
and this is the future. Why did you pick this image, and just explain why is this the future?
That was a hard one. I mean, all of them were hard ones to pick images of each of the things, and you had to sit down and really do some soul searching and figure out what image you want from these particular times, especially in a life that is full and ongoing. And so this is the picture of the piece that I'm currently working on, and it is still wet, and it could totally collapse or change or shift. And to me, it just is the future is the work. The future is the making of this work, and it has the potential to be anything.
You studied ceramics, and
Right.
you know the chemistry of.
I know the
of it.
chemistry, but
But how could it collapse if you know it so well?
Well, you can get into a system where things are consistent, but it always has some surprise, and sometimes the surprises lead to new discoveries. And one of the things is this clay is temperamental.
You have a few examples.
I have
right
a few
here.
examples. So in that size range, that smaller kind of, almost like a small child's head. This would be the smallest of those, and they range in size from here to maybe about that big.
Okay. And then you have like two others.
Yeah, in my life size series. And so the ones that are based on basically the human proportions.
Why this particular size? Is this a half size? Is this a size that you've developed on your own?
I think when I was first making them, I was thinking about shells.
Seashells.
Seashells.
Okay.
So so I worked within that, but also I was pregnant. So they were
That
all
makes
like
absolute sense.
baby heads.
Right.
When I started working with this particular body of these smaller head sizes.
And then you have one more. The textures, again, perhaps fits into your ideas. Again, when you start something, you don't have an idea of what exactly the final product's going to be.
Right.
You're going on your instinct.
Right.
So with that in mind, was there a way that you were going with this that's different from that, or is it?
Well, this is so when we're talking about like the future and how things can change with the clay. So what in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, I've taken a lot more risk with the media. So previously, I wouldn't say, the potential for it to shift, but I take a lot more risk now. Some of my most interesting work has happened because of the mistakes.
Right.
This is a very traditional way of glazing. It's very safe. I know exactly what it's going to look like when I'm finished.
Yes.
I'm basically, using the oxides and then glazing it over. With this piece, I did that first, and it was okay. I felt like that I wanted to see what else was possible, and I experimented with some glazed surfaces. I experimented with some wax. And I also, when I treat the surface, I think about the mask. So the piece is a mask, and then I painted this additional mask on top in a different glaze treatment. And you can see the original painting, the cobalt oxides bleeding through. I mean, and there's glazes that you can work with that'll work just like paint, and you have a certain level of control.
Yes.
But they just don't feel like those temperamental glazes,
Right.
Where this kind of flux.
They feel like a job versus an experience.
Yes, exactly. You could predict the outcome. It comes out of the kiln and you're like, oh my goodness, or you're like, oh my goodness. And then you're like, oh, well, actually,
Right.
That's
Right.
kind of amazing. So, for myself, I mean, I guess that's my selfishness in my practice. I like that element of surprise that happens with the work.
So this video that you did here, Breaking Head, which is these sculptural faces that you've made. They're almost like masks.
Yes.
And in the image here, you attach all these masks by string or wires to yourself. But before you started to do that and you started to ascend the stair, you put a kind of carpet, for lack of a better word, in white all along the stair. And before you finished putting the carpet up, the wind had blown it away. And then you ascended the stair And these masks you're walking along and you're breaking all of these heads. And you'd make these things that a lot of people think are permanent, and you're breaking them. You're breaking your own work to make a point about your work.
Well, I think everything is about permanence and impermanence. So clay is this massive material to me that has all of this potential and meaning, right? Its ability to shape shift, but it's also its chemical ability to change from, something that is like mud to something that is hard to something that is stone. It literally becomes stone when heat is applied. And then it's one of those materials that you could bury in the dirt for 3,000 years and dig up and it'll be exactly the same. Or you can drop it and it will shatter into a million pieces. And so I like that. I really like, in dealing with my actual body of work, the space between the dichotomy.
We understand the sort of the range of clay from something that's sort of unbreakable to something that's breakable, right? Why would you choose then to do that? Why would you not choose the more permanent?
I'll choose both.
Okay.
I mean, the clay for me becomes a tool for my narratives that I create, like some interest in creating these mythologies and, but in mythology and in life and in narrative, things end and some things don't.
Had to clean house. Sweep old wooden floor. Mop cracking linoleum tile.
The thing that, in talking to you now, that I understand is that my assessment was, and this is sort of a lazy kind of critic thing to do, which is to bring you back to the masters. As I was trained as an architect, and I always sort of get rooted into the masters of architecture, how do you make the break from the masters and say, all right, I've learned that, I'm going to put that aside, I'm going to go my own way?
When I painted, I thought about it a lot more because I feel like that's a very European masters kind of genre of work. You're definitely always referencing something when you're dealing with that. I think ultimately my work is it's a hybrid. So there's definitely an interest in my making, specifically because it's sculpture, specifically because it's clay. It lends itself already to indigenous bodies of work.
Indigenous meaning?
Indigenous meaning like Native American, African, East Indian. I'm looking at traditional ceramic vessel making in China.
In painting, you're looking at sort of a European model. In sculpture, you have a worldwide palette.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you so much for taking the time to show us your works. And I'm looking forward to your future works.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great conversation.